So now if you add that together with India and China, this is a huge area.
Right.
So Penang cannot focus on only Penang. So the way I look at it is that we in Penang need to now figure out how to engage other areas because there will be limited. I come back to Penang and I find Penang has some of the most exciting technologies you can find. Some you can't even find in Silicon Valley. Penang cannot focus on only Penang. It has to find a way to leverage their skills to others. For example, Johor and Singapore is going to create this JSEZ, this huge industrial zone that is 2 times bigger than Shenzhen. When I moved into different groups, different positions, and of course I knew a lot more about the area, the work I have to do, but I really never really think about where it's going to be, what is going to happen at the other end. I think if I did, I would have been scared stiff. Most of the brilliant people are British. Oh, so I was surprised. So I started investigating. So it turns out that that's where the yellow brick road is. I was informed of delegations from China, from mayors of cities coming in doing a tour of Silicon Valley. They were trying to understand what is semiconductors. What happened was because when infrared became ubiquitous, that means a lot more devices. You might remember Palm Pilot.
I remember Palm Pilot, yeah.
Yeah, it was the big one. They had infrared and you were able to exchange stuff. So now that created some new thinking by Peter Thiel and his team. That said, instead of sending business cards and pictures, what if we send money? Human ingenuity, human creativity, you never know. Technology, I always believe, is a tool to help business to achieve something to help people. So on both ends of it, there's a human.
We're thrilled to welcome E.T. Tan, a results-oriented leader with a distinguished career driving business success.
With a wealth of experience leading multinational organizations, ET has consistently delivered exceptional results in diverse and challenging environments.
His insights on leadership and strategic growth are invaluable. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome back to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. My name is Salah Nasri and I'm your host. Whether you're an industry veteran or someone that's just curious about the semiconductor industry, this is the podcast for you. We'll be covering the latest in cutting-edge R&D and leadership strategies and also market insights. However, before I continue any further, I kindly ask you all a small little favor. Click that subscribe button. In a very short time, we've hit 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, touching 5,000 subscribers on Spotify, and the goal is to double it this year. Because at the end of the day, the more followers we get, the more enticing and exhilarating this podcast will become, just like our special guest today. So without further ado, I am absolutely delighted and honored to welcome our special guest today, E.T. Tan, who is very much known as a legend here in Malaysia for his incredible work that he's done globally, with a career that spans working at the greatest of companies such as HP, Seagate, Solterra, and currently advising on semiconductor initiatives and other industries with local government, and also consulting for organizations. And also, he does an incredible work with us here at the International Semiconductor Industry Group with our Southeast Asia initiatives. So without further ado, let's dive into the discussion. E.T., pleasure to have you on the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. Lovely to see you as always.
Thank you, Salah, and I really appreciate you inviting. It was a pleasure to be here.
Marvelous. E.T., before I came to Malaysia, I already heard of your name, and your reputation speaks very highly of yourself. So I'm very intrigued to kind of understand pretty much like anything that happens in this world or movement, that everything has a beginning. So I'd love to know, what was your childhood like here in Malaysia, and what kind of led you to the path in semiconductor manufacturing?
Oh, wow, Salah. Not very many people ask me about this question, so it's kind of going back a while.
Yes.
I have to say, it all started when I was about 12 or 13, and I visited a friend's house, and they had an electronic organ. So my friend was playing beautifully on their organ. And so that completely touched me. You know how music touches your soul? That's exactly the moment it happened. And at that point, I was having this desire going, I would like to be able to play like that. But we know that my family couldn't afford that. So I had to think something else. I thought maybe I can build one myself. And so at the age of 12 and a half, 13, I started saving pocket money. And through an electronic magazine, I started building a little music board and then making sounds. And so that's actually how I got into electronics. And I just continued to save money, build different things, amplifiers, speakers, and so on. And that led me to my degree for electronics. And that's how I got into this area. My first job was at HP. And that was in Scotland. And so from there, I kind of learned about manufacturing. And then after a few years, I got into R&D, and we end up creating some fantastic products, working with Sony. And so that path led me to where I am today, with many stops along the way, creating new products, working with very, very smart people. Really, I would like to say I'm kind of working with them. They are the ones with the brains, but it's about how you pull these people together. So that's how I ended up going through there and moving on to then I was in HP for 20 years. At that time, I had about 7 different divisions. So the lucky thing I had at HP is that HP was not one big company. It was different divisions doing different things. And so I was able to expand my skills there, working with people like HP Labs. So they were very, very smart PhDs. And also, after my 20 years in HP, I moved on to Seagate. And from there, I learned about a whole new world, about disk drives, about how you put some of these things together, creating new businesses. And from that point, I kind of created my own consulting after that. That was in Silicon Valley. And when I came back to this part of the world, I started off in Singapore, had my own startup, and then worked with a lot of startup companies, helped them bloom before coming back to Malaysia. And now this is where I am.
Wow. There's no such thing as self-made. There's always someone who's had an impact on someone's career or opened doors for them. Who would you say for you was the inspiration for you to get into semiconductor manufacturing? And, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of specific guardian angels that you've had in your life.
Okay. In fact, I would say at every transition, every job, it was always that person who invited me to go in. So, for example, when I was in my first job in Scotland, HP, doing instrumentation, I was merely a production engineer, just supporting the production lines, software, and help creating the CAD/CAM systems. The lead of the division in Bristol was the one who asked me to come. In fact, actually, initially, I didn't want to go because disk drives are very mechanical things. I was really into electronics. So he said, no, why don't you just come down? So I took the night train from Scotland, which is in Edinburgh, down to Bristol. And when we arrived at 6:30 in the morning, the train doors opened. And I don't know if you've been to Scotland. It's grey, it's wet, it's cold. And when the doors opened in Bristol, I looked up, the sky was blue, the sun was shining.
Yeah.
And immediately I went, I don't care what they're doing, I'm coming down. So that's how I went and got transferred into the disk drive side. And it's from there I got to enter up to do into R&D to design new products.
I see. Well, of course, also the difference is the accent as well, I'm sure. Did you manage to understand people in Scotland?
Oh, the funny thing is, when I was in Bristol, here I am, a Malaysian Chinese in England, and they were looking at me going, why do you have Scottish accent?
So you actually adapted the Scottish accent? Okay. Wow. So, I mean, you know, E.T., let's say with regards to an upcoming Malaysian graduate that's coming out here from Malaysia and then taking on international territories, what were the fears that you had? You must have had some sort of fear, or were you excited to get out, or were you like, I'm leaving my comfort zone of my family and friends in the region, glorious weather, great food, nice beaches, and then you go to miserable land to an extent in terms of weather, but
Now I have to say, you're looking at a different person now from when he left Malaysia.
Okay.
You laugh again. When I left Malaysia, I did not have a clue where I was going. I didn't have a clue what I was going into. The only thing I had when I first moved to the UK, I had an address that a schoolmate of mine said, if you're in London, go see him. Because I was going to a boarding school in the UK.
I see. Okay.
So I landed up in Victoria Station on the 26th of December. You know, in the UK, nothing happens on the 26th of December. I didn't even know that.
Boxing Day.
Yes. So there were 3 other Americans waiting in line for a taxi.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think I had no clue what I was expecting to even be scared.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so it was just automatic. You just went through. And so when I moved into different groups, different positions, and of course, I knew a lot more about the area, the work I have to do, but I really never really think about where it's going to be, what is going to happen at the other end. I think if I did, I would have been scared stiff. So what happens is you just I think about how do I make the best of that situation when I'm there, look at what's needed, observe, use your skills, and then make the best out of it. And so because of that, every time after I've done one area, one division, another group would ask for me to go and join them. for some reason, I get spotted, or at least the work is done. And that's how I got transferred to the US.
I see.
The director of strategy in HP Labs, he called up and said, "Hey, E.T., you want to work in the US?" I go, "Actually, no." "Why?" "It's too expensive there. You know, the houses in the Silicon Valley, they are $1 million. Yeah." So I said, "No." So he said, "Oh, I understand." So 3 weeks later, he called back, "We'll take care of your mortgage for 5 years.
Wow.
And then I go, so every time I gave an excuse, they would come up with us.
Would you say the key motivation is the monetary element, or is there something else that was a key motivation? I mean, my father, he migrated from Morocco to England in the 60s, and there was only one motivation, money. The monetary elements. I mean, he had it's a great life in Morocco. It's just a lack of money. What would you say was the key driver for you to leave your motherland, to take the risk to go to the United Kingdom and then go to the US after?
Circumstances, which is when I graduated from Imperial College London, I went back home to Malaysia here.
Wow.
Okay. The problem was I couldn't find a job here.
Okay.
But I guess, when I was at university at Imperial College, there was what they call milk rounds. That means employers would come and interview you before you graduate. So knowing that I wanted to go back to Malaysia to work, I said to them, "Here's the application." I put on top, "Please transfer to Malaysia."
And I really wanted to go home.
Yes. So I asked them to. So when I was back in Malaysia, one of them called back. And he said, "We know you want to be in Malaysia." I remember there was this guy, the HR manager for HP in Scotland. He said, "Well, I know you want to be in Malaysia, but if you change your mind, we have a ticket in your name at American Express. Just go and pick it up. Tell us what flight you're on, and we'll do everything."
Oh.
So I was talking to my dad, my parents, and they said, "Let's go try it." Hey, there's HP already in Singapore.
Wow.
So I went to HP and said, "Hey, I want a job here. Can you give me a job here? I don't want to go there."
And they didn't give it to you.
And
so you had no
it
option.
turns out they didn't have a position. So I ended up taking this ticket, to the UK.
So would you say is the differentiator between your life experience in semiconductor manufacturing? What was the big difference that you saw in the way UK does innovation and the US does innovation? I'd be intrigued to hear your answer to that.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I think that's actually the question that a lot of people would like to know, because even recently, we had a delegation of people from the UK organized by the British High Comm. They came over. Okay. So my view, having worked in the UK, is that the education system there is brilliant. You are able to get to very deep technology stuff. They are actually very good. But when I went to Silicon Valley, most of the brilliant people are British. Oh, so I was surprised. So I started investigating. So it turns out that that's where the yellow brick road is.
Wow.
Okay. So the brilliant people, they end up in the US because there's money, there is an environment that they can excel in. In the UK, they are brilliant to do analysis, to do the deep learning, but there isn't the way you would flourish. So it's as if the garden's well kept, but it doesn't bloom as well as in the Silicon Valley in the US. So that's one of the big difference even today we see.
I think one of the key elements that allows the US to be evidently so successful is the acceptance of failure. I think in the UK, very similar to the Asian culture, you have to always get 99%. You always have to be the best of the best, right? There's no, if you fail, you're seen as, it's not seen as in a positive light. But I feel that the Silicon Valley approach, they accept failure with open arms. Is this something that you've seen as well? Is this something that you felt?
Okay. So absolutely. In fact, I personally, when I was in Silicon Valley, and when I was also in the UK doing the Silicon Valley things, okay, the focus is on innovation. The focus is on how do you create something out of nothing.
Yeah,
I'll give some examples in a minute. Okay, and the Silicon Valley culture allows that. And so people are prepared to fund. And here's the difference. The people who are prepared to fund are not scared to lose the funding. Because they know if I continue, it's like going after the lottery. Right. People in lottery, they go lotteries, they know they're going to win, but they never stop.
Yeah, they just keep going.
They keep going, right? So that's really where I see the difference. In the UK, I think probably is because you have the financiers, the banking thinking process.
Yeah. I wanted to actually go a little bit more further then. So, I mean, in terms of innovation at HP, of course, you helped pioneer a groundbreaking category of tape storage, right? In collaboration with Sony's Kentaro Odaka, correct me if I'm wrong with the pronunciation, which was the inventor of the CD-ROM. Yep. So could you share more about that experience?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's my favorite story.
Okay, well.
So I had just transferred to Bristol. We just created the production line for disk drives. So this is where the HP mentality at that time was, how do we create new product lines? So the HP mentality is, you've already got a production line that's making money. We actually broke even within 9 months after setting up the whole factory. So we use that money to create new products. So the investigation was how to create the next tape drive. So the vision that we had was, how do we create the last tape drive in the industry? Because at that time, if you remember the James Bond movies, you have these big round things, the tape drives going round and round. Okay, those are half-inch tapes, but they only cover 80 megabytes. So the question is, how do we make something smaller? And so my job, I was then asked to lead the team to investigate what is this. My job was to then look at all the different alternatives, and we got a team. And so Sony came to us and said, we have this tape. It's a digital audio tape. And because at that point in time, CD-ROMs was already taking off, and they wanted to have tape because it was meant to be a replacement for their Walkman. The Walkman is selling the hotcakes.
Sure.
But it's normal tape and it wears out. So this one is digital, so it will not wear out. But the US music industry stopped them from going into the music because that would mean music would even more pirates.
Easy to copy. Sure.
Yeah. So we looked at it and say, how do we make it into a digital storage? So that was my job with my team, and taking their drive, putting it together. So we spent a lot of analysis to make sure it's going to be good enough. We then got the team together and agreed, they would give us the hardware, which is the mechanical to do the tape. HP would do the electronics on how to control this and how do we package it. So that's how we ended up creating the product. But the issue was my job, I went to see the market. I went to look at customers. HP's customers at that time were people like Citibank, okay, Chase Manhattan, because the banks use tape drives to store all of the bank accounts for a long time.
All right.
So we went to see them, and you know what? Their feedback was, it's good. It's so small. Can I show you what it looks like? I have it here.
Really? Oh, wow.
So this is
that.
tape.
Look at that.
It's the size of a credit card, but a bit thicker.
Mm.
Okay. And so the bank managers, they look at it and they said, wow, impressive. Compared with a big half-inch tape drive like this. There's a monster like a big fridge. This one here is a small pack. So we showed them the picture of the pack too. And here's the picture. You can see it's there we go.
So that's all the specs that was on there.
Yes.
The
So that
data storage.
it's about
Wow.
5.25 inch. So it's an industry format. You can put it into a rack.
Mm-hmm.
So all the banks said it's great, but can you make it bigger? So it was a shock. They want it bigger. So I had to ask why. The reason? They were afraid disgruntled employees will put it in the pocket
And take it.
Walk out.
Really?
and walk out of the bank. That would be 1.2 gigabytes of data.
In their pockets. Wow. Would you say this was, the most advanced piece of technology at that time?
Yes. At that time, it was. Because to put all that together, if you think about it, the half-inch tape drive is a huge rack.
Mm.
We had to take that electronics, shrink it into that. So we had to design, this is the board, the prototype, and we had to shrink this into that.
Wow.
And so this is the first time I had the experience of working and designing ICs. So we had a few ICs, and one of the ICs that we have in there was fabricated by the HP division that's doing chips.
Mm.
Today is Avago, and it's actually the Broadcom part of it.
Wow.
So that's the division that spun off to become Broadcom. Okay?
Wow.
So that chip is the process we went through to put it in to make it work.
And just to clarify for the audience, how many transistors is in that chip?
Oh, that was the densest chip at that time because our Fort Collins
In
division-
1988?
Yes.
How many?
1 million.
1 million transistors in 1988.
That was the record at the time. Nobody else had 1 million in one chip.
How long did you maintain that record for, do you think?
Oh, I don't think for very long because after that, the set of products that came out.
Yeah.
By the way, that product was the first generation.
Wow.
Subsequent to that, we ended up with 7 generations of that, which means it took about 20 years.
Was
So
it?
this design
Mm.
went on for 7 generations because it was meant to be the last tape drive.
That's insane. That's insane. Looking at where technology is today, how does this make you feel when you look at this?
It looks really old. It looks really old.
But would you say that this was the enabler for the technology that we have today?
Yes. In a way, yes. But I think today, backup is very different.
Absolutely.
Okay. But what it created was the thinking process that spawned off a whole bunch of things. How do you now create new categories of products? In fact, one of the innovations that we did, which is really a business innovation, is to get this market to expand, to get the banks to buy. The first thing the bank said is, can we buy it from other people? And of course, I'm sitting there going, why? They needed a second source. They don't want to be locked into you.
All right.
So the only way to do that is to open up your specifications to other people to do. So we came up with a strategy that said, no, we're not going to open specifications. What we open is the industry standard of how to make the tape industry compatible. That means you can buy this drive and you can use the tape and put it in any drive from any, and the bankers were really happy with that because it meant it's compatible.
Yeah.
So how we created an industry standard, that's a whole new story also, because we had to lead, because our competitors' first question is, do we trust you? Do we trust you that you'll give us everything so that we can be successful? And so that is the big learning that I had that subsequently allowed me to lead and help 2 other industry standards later.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting, this was done in the 80s. I mean, just a couple of years before then, TSMC was founded, right? What do you see? What's the difference that you see in this time in the 80s to the time that we're in right now?
Oh, wow. Okay. So this time in the 80s, we were innovating in terms of products. How do we get new functions in? How do we get more effective, faster, smaller? Then towards the end of the 80s, the internet started, right? So that's where it started booming. And there, a whole new change happened. I was very lucky to be in Silicon Valley when that happened. Okay, so what happened there is other innovations came in. And that's when you have a lot more people thinking different things. And so I was also part of some of those teams. For example, we in HP Labs then started thinking, how do we create products that don't need to be connected to Windows? Because you remember in the 80s, everything was connected to Windows. The Wintel. Okay. You only had Microsoft, you only had Intel. So if you needed to put this connector, you have to work with Microsoft. So if you created something else, it had to be. So HP was creating printers. There was a very big business for printers at the time. So the only connection was printers. So one of the questions we had in HP Labs was, can we get the printer to print from something else besides a computer? There's nothing else.
Like as a standalone printer or?
Yeah.
Okay.
As a standalone printer. Because the only way a printer can work is if they connect it to a PC.
Okay.
So that's why we started thinking, what if you can take your camera and print directly without going through a PC? Now, if you think about that, the question becomes, do you need a cable? If you need a cable, it's got to be hard. What cable would you need? RS-232 or some other? So in HP Labs, that's where we started thinking it should be wireless. At that time in 1989, RF wireless cost a bomb. It's $100, $200 US dollars per chip. Okay, so you can't put that into a camera. So the only thing available was infrared. So the question we had then was, how do you make that in every device? So this is the second industry standard that we then start thinking about. To do that, you need to be able to have a camera, a printer, a calculator, a kiosk, a phone. Every company who's involved in those must want to do that. You have to explain to them, why would they put this thing in? By the way, the infrared chip would cost about $1 at the time, compared with $200 for Wi-Fi. At that time, there wasn't one. Okay, so my job was the one who ended up creating the standard because of the experience I already had. So we ended up getting a group of people together, actually in Santa Clara. First meeting, everybody came together. I did the pitch. This is the vision of what you can achieve if you didn't have to connect to a PC. Of course, Microsoft was there too.
Yeah.
Okay. Microsoft was there. IBM was there. There was about 120 people in that room. And they said, wow, this is fantastic vision. Yes, we want it. We will create a standard. But we don't want yours.
Wow.
They don't want HP's. They said, we want to have this industry standard created so that we can all create the standard. So that was a bit of a, it was a big shake-up. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, I made that presentation. At 10 o'clock, I had to call back to headquarters. Hello, if we don't open this up, they're all going to go next door and create their own standard. All of them were going to go.
And then what happened?
So by lunchtime, we created a plan. Yes, we will create this. We will open it up. We will create marketing committee, technical committee. Who wants to be in it? It'll be open, and we will put our specifications there free for everyone to use. So for the next 18 months, they all got together and looked at other proposals. We had Apple come in with a proposal. We had Sharp come in with a proposal. Philips, Motorola. So they all reviewed. Within 18 months, they came up with one standard. So that was the fastest standard created. And because of that, everyone then supported it. 200 companies did.
Wow.
And within 3 years, 2 billion devices had IRDA. So that, for me, was a huge, major achievement. But I cannot say that, we did it. It's actually the whole industry. So it's about how you get the whole industry together to move if you have the vision. But that vision, we all had to work it together. Yeah. There was no one person with a vision, so we had to go through a bit iteration. And we got there.
Remarkable. From your global perspective then, so, over the past 35 years, what significant changes or trends have you observed in the semiconductor landscape, especially regarding how, modern life today can benefit from such new technologies that are coming to play?
Okay. Wow.
Because, you've seen it from the drives to now AI and ChatGPT and...
Yep. So I would say from the user perspective, from all of us normal, we see products. We don't see technology. We see products. We see how the things that we feel and touch and we use.
Yeah.
The key part is that semiconductor have to be in there. And it's about how that translates the technology from semicon into the product. But the process I would like to explain is, before you go into the semicon, you have to know what is the product.
Sure.
You have to know what's in your head is the product. Then you design the chips to fit into the product that you already have in mind. So that part is the one that is creative. Of course, that creative part, we also have some spectacular failures. In HP Labs, I was in some projects that had some spectacular failures. $45 million down the drain. Yeah. Because we wanted to create something that, as a result of IRDA, the kind of portable devices that you can have, we were trying to create, we created one actually, that is a handheld product, handheld scanner.
Wow. So how did you know that was going to be the thing?
Yes. This is where we had researchers in HP Labs who looked at how people use things. So at that time, remember it's in the late 80s, there was flip charts, we had workshops, we had retreats, and where there were flip charts everywhere. And at the end of those retreats, some poor person will have to transcribe them. So we said, why don't we create a scanner that you can just scan this by hand? At that time, remember, there were no cameras, no digital cameras. So those we created, and we had chips inside. So we had to create chips. And so that product, unfortunately, didn't sell.
It didn't come through. Remarkable.
So we created those products. They ended up, today, it's transformed into the optical sensor for the mouse.
I would love to, I mean, of course, from I think what most companies are struggling with, especially with companies that are dealing with commodities, right, is finding what's going to be the next big application, or what's the next buzz. How much is it actually having awareness of industry trends? How much is it having luck as well? And how much is it just going with the flow and just doing what it is? Because I think what I've realized over the last couple of years is there are some companies with their visions. They're very, very, very focused, and they go all in.
Yes.
If we just look at the highest market cap in semiconductors, NVIDIA, Jensen was specifically all in with GPUs. He was specifically, right, AI, GPUs, this is me. This is what I'm going to focus on. And some people thought it was absolutely crazy. And now look at him today. It paid off. You have some other companies like On Semiconductor who are just going all in on silicon carbide. Who knows? Maybe in a couple of years, EVs do blow up and the bet comes into play. What's your perspective on these high risk bets? And what is it? What is it that makes one win, basically?
Okay. So I can share the part from my experience where we had failures and successes. Sure. I would say the ones that are successes are based on two things. One is you have a view of the trends and where the market, what the market needs are. So, for example, the tape drive I just talked about.
Yes.
No one said we wanted this thing.
It was just out of the just pure innovation and
well, not quite. So the physical part, nobody said they wanted. Nobody said I wanted this thing to be this big. Okay. Unlike what we hear about the story of Akio Morita, it says this Walkman has to be this size. Okay. What we discovered is that what they needed is a way of backing up that is faster, smaller, cheaper. The technology part is how do you combine the different variables that you understand to achieve those faster, smaller, cheaper. It so happens, and this is now luck, it so happens Sony came and said, I have this thing that we can use. So we had to investigate whether it can actually serve the purpose. Only then we put it together, and because you match. So even when we showed it to them, to the customers, they had some other objections. But those objections can be handled in a different way. So we need to know the difference between what technology is capable of doing and what you as a technology manager can manage within your dimensions. And so when that's talking about the products. And so understanding that is key. For example, one of the things that I had to do was to investigate the market for digital cameras for HP.
You invented digital cameras for HP?
No, I didn't invent.
Investigate.
Investigate it,
right.
Yes. Yes. So
the cameras were dominated at the time by the Japanese, right? The Kodaks of the world. And
at that time,
Canon.
The cameras were film cameras.
Wow.
If you remember, we had the printer,
yes,
she said, and at that time, they're all film cameras. So our thinking is we need more content to dump into the printer. The best content are pictures. So HP knowing Kodak. So I went to Kodak with a team. Kodak showed us their first digital camera, $20,000, this big. But they never pursued it. Okay, so we then said, this is the kind of stuff. So when we opened up the standard for infrared, guess who came in? Casio said, I will support infrared standard. I will put it in. Then Casio put it in and created their own printer. And they were having a whale of a time in Japan, selling instant pictures from their camera. My job then was, HP then said, we should go into cameras.
Bit too late, yeah.
Actually, not quite. So the investigation that we had to do is, because HP wanted to make sure that our printers can give the right resolution for the user. So we come back to the user again. What is the resolution the user wants? It's straight. The user wants an A4 size picture, the same quality as what you get from your film camera.
Right.
So we had the investigation to find out at how many pixel level would you be able to have to get the same quality. So we did a lot of work and we concluded, you'll be surprised. The conclusion is 2 megapixels.
Wow, 2 megapixels.
2 megapixels is enough to print in a way that nobody will tell the difference. So then our first job was to create a camera that have 2 megapixels in it. And the target is for the consumer, $499.
Look at that.
And HP couldn't do it, so we engaged Konica. So the HP camera is a Konica. Okay? And so HP now has a very large market share of cameras in the US, but they couldn't get out of the US because the marketing. I don't know if they still have it. So the key part here is semiconductors is an enabler to a product, to a market.
Sure. So, having worked in different parts of the world, and I think it would be vital to understand from your experiences is what notable cultural or, let's say, strategic difference do you see in how organizations are approaching innovation? I know a big headache here in Malaysia and certain parts of the world is talent management and technology adoption. I'd be intrigued to hear your perspectives on it.
Oh, okay. So, wow, that's a very big topic. I spent time in the UK, the British, the English and the Scottish are different.
It's true.
Again, different in Silicon Valley. Again, different with Sony when I was working with Sony. And then again when I was in China. If I can summarize that, it's really different cultures have different ways of working. Okay, so for example, when we were working with Sony on this tape drive, we had to create a chip. Okay, and so their chip, they had to create a chip to do the functionality that we said we needed to do for this computer product. We had to do our part. So we do the usual way. We went through Cadence and used the CAD/CAM software, put all this together. We wrote firmware to test our part, and then they do their part. So we had a timeline. At this time, at this date, we will bring those things together and connect and see how. So we brought our bit, which was a prototype like this, and then they brought their prototype, which was about this size. And we went, what is that? That's our chip.
Wow.
We went, you're kidding, because it had different leaves. Everything was wire wrapped. Okay? Wire wrap means they had all discrete products, discrete components, and they were simulating this chip in a box this big. And the reason is because they don't have access to the kind of software we have. And their way of doing is to be very frugal. They don't buy tools. They do everything by hand. Manually. So that chip was manually wired.
Wow.
As opposed to us running it EDA. I'm quite sure they'll be very upset to hear me say this today, but they don't do it today. Maybe they don't do it today. Yes. But they explain this is how we are able to do these simulations and stuff like that. So the culture is different. So I will see in China, they do differently. And because we assumed they were doing it the same way we would. So our schedule went back a couple of months because of that. Because now we have to do a whole bunch of things. It's difficult. It's more difficult for them to make changes than for us.
Oh, yeah. Also, I mean, let's say, for example, the HP today isn't the HP of your time.
No.
With all due respect. And the same with certain companies. The Intel today isn't like the Intel of that time. Yeah. In a rapidly evolving industry like semiconductor manufacturing, one day you can be the titan, and then the next day you disappear, or you just become average or below average. How, from your perspectives, can businesses in the semiconductor industry remain agile and responsive to disruptions? Whether they come from new competitors, the most common one is, of course, shifting consumer demands, global events, and even internally with board of directors. I'd like to hear your perspectives on this.
Okay. The semiconductor supply chain today is so integrated, you really cannot look at it as different pieces. Every piece is connected with some piece. Okay, you might want to try to come up with a different one. Right? It's very hard. But I think one of the things that the US government is actually indirectly doing is they're actually encouraging China to create their own supply chain.
Absolutely.
I don't think they realize that.
You think so? I mean, it's quite, from that perspective, E.T., it was actually the Trump administration in 2016, and I recall this from a discussion in Silicon Valley. It's actually quite funny. It was actually a discussion with Condoleezza Rice was presenting. And someone asked that, responded to her, said, well, in 2016 with the Trump administration, the sanctions that were applied to China actually helped them accelerate their self-sufficiency. So it's intriguing to hear you repeat the same perspective.
Yeah, because when I was in Silicon Valley in the 1980s, 90s, okay, I was informed of delegations from China, from mayors of cities coming in, doing a tour of Silicon Valley. They were trying to understand what is semiconductors and why is it that they need so many hundreds of millions to fund this thing that they say they want to build in Chongqing or whatever. Okay? They have no clue. In fact, the funny story is somebody had to explain to them, said, you need to spend 45 million to buy this lithography machine. And they have they're sort of saying, what is it?
What is it, lithography?
What is the, So they would have consultants going there, giving decks of 25 slides, 50 slides, explaining how it works. And they were like glazed over because they've never heard what this is. And then somebody then explained and said, lithography is actually like a big camera. It's taking this picture and then shrinking it and then repeating it for the... Oh, okay then. sign.
Order. Wow.
Okay, so that was then. Because what they're having now is that they're building it themselves. They were dependent. When the moment you say, I'm not, they're going to go, what am I going to do with all these parts? We have to survive.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's going to happen. Although people will say they're going to be slower, but hey, human ingenuity, human creativity, you never know.
So that is from a perspective of global events. So what about your perspective on shifting consumer demands?
Okay. If we look at what's happening now and what is it that they're demanding? What is it that they're shifting from? If you look, they can only shift from what they have. Consumers don't come up with something and say, I want this thing, right? So shifting demands is actually based on what you are throwing into the buckets. So if you know what's throwing into the bucket, then you have a way of checking, looking and see where it's useful. For example, we hear about TikTok today, first of all, being cut off. The moment people hear it's going to be cut off, they get creative. They start looking for something else. Is that shifting demand? Yeah.
Correct.
That is shifting demand. So what they do is they have a need that they will find a different way to satisfy that now you cannot predict.
Right.
So one of the things I learned is that if you can anticipate and say this is the direction they would want to go, you can then intersect them. And sometimes that could be some really wild thing. For example, the infrared we had. Okay, so nobody would have predicted PayPal coming out from the infrared standard that we have.
Right.
How did that happen? Okay, what happened was because when infrared became ubiquitous, that means a lot more devices. You might remember Palm Pilot.
I remember Palm Pilot, yeah.
Yeah, it was the big one. They had infrared and you were able to exchange stuff. So now that created some new thinking by Peter Thiel and his team. That said, instead of sending business cards and pictures, what if we send money? So that actually was how the original value proposition of PayPal was. Mobile money. So in fact, they invited the IRDA management team to be at Woodside Cafe in Silicon Valley when they transferred 5 million from Sequoia over to them using those two.
The PayPal.
That's PayPal.
Palm Pilot, yeah.
That's how it started. So we would never have expected that. So the ideas spun off a lot of things. So is that a trend? Yes. But then they had to anticipate certain things. It did work. So PayPal turned into the internet money, right? So one of the things I think trends has to do with what is the great demand of something. When that great demand of something is already moving, if you add to it, they will move in that direction. If you add to the left, they will move to the left. If you add to the right, they'll move to the right. But if you add to the right and it's the wrong one, they won't move there. Yeah, so that's really where I think what would happen would be a lot of people are going to try different things.
And yeah, I think one key thing that you must see as a big difference is in comparison to now and previously is competition. Would you say there's more competition today than before?
Oh yeah, definitely. Now there's a lot more competition. And that competition is fueled by information. Sure. Because a lot more information is now there. The problem is you can't tell the difference between information and hype.
Yes, yeah, that's a very valid point. And we would, okay, so key conflicts that we are seeing today is also the involvement of board of directors. were having issues as well within their organizations, because there were companies that were at very high prices, let's say stock prices a few months ago, to where they are right now because of wrong decisions made. What's your perspectives on that?
I went through one of that myself, and that was HP.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I was one of my last projects responsibilities was instructed from up high. HP was already growing so fast. In fact, it's growing at about 45% per annum because of the printers. Yeah, at that time, if you remember,
Yep.
Printers was it. HP is a printer company growing at 45%, and the stock market was expecting you to continue. If you said I was going to make 30, your stock price is going to get hammered. Why? Because it's 45 down to 30. Okay. So the objective that the board had was, can we grow at 35% per annum for the next X? Because instead of 45, at least if they commit to 35, they at least can survive. So this is a very direct instruction from the board. So now if you look at how HP grew, it's always through innovation, our own products. In fact, the strategy is every 18 months we replace our own products. Okay. So when the printers came in, it just exploded. By the way, do you know the ink cartridges that you buy for your inkjets?
Yeah.
They were at 1.80% profit margin.
80% profit margin.
Yes. Wow. Okay, so that contributed. So everybody was like, whoa, this is our golden goose. So the question is, can you continue to introduce products that is going to have 1 billion out the gate or more and then grow? Okay. Without that, the concern is that the printer business will stagnate and then they will die. So this is all the board level issues. Okay. So that's why the last CEO was Liu Platt. My last project was one that had, I was one of the last projects to do a $1 billion business. If you want to see that, I can show it to you.
Yes, please. Let's check it out. So this is the last $1 billion business.
This is, once again, it's an electronic device. Does not require a printer because it's got the infrared here.
Okay.
You fill in the form. Here. It's a clipboard.
Okay.
So, and then you write on here.
This is I've got this for my kids.
Exactly. So this is a working model. You can write, put it, and you fill in the form. And when you finish filling it, you now can tear this off and give it to the customer. So you can look at this use model is in every car repair shop.
Really?
In every use model, not this product.
Okay.
Use model means in the US is a clipboard, warehouse guy carrying these things around, checking stuff out, hospitals. So the market for this, this is the first prototype, but we didn't go further after that. So the idea is this will be digitizing pen and paper. So now we are able to create, we see the market, we can see that, to create this. And so we had the design for all this, put this together.
See, this is where the idea for the iPad came into play?
It was kind of using the iPad. The iPad, a version of iPad was already available.
Was it already available?
Yes. Okay. But the iPad was no paper because, you see, the issue, understanding the users, they needed paper.
Sure.
When I do something, when I say, write down all if you go and get your car repaired, they will give you a piece of paper in triplicates. This one, when you come back, you bring the paper, I'll give the car back to you. Even today. Okay. Yeah. So that model is the one that we ended up creating. But to cut the long story short, didn't make it. Why? So we put the whole plan together, had a team to create this, design this, put this together. You've got batteries and everything in here.
Does it still work?
It can work if I have the software.
Wow.
There's the batteries.
Impressive.
Okay.
Mm.
The issue. We proposed this to the management. They looked at it. How much do you need? 40 million to finish this.
As to do mass production.
Yes, to get marketing, to do everything else. Here's what happened. They looked at it, 40 million to get this. I'm going to get a $1 billion business in the next 2 years. If I put 40 million into my laser jet, I'm going to get 20 million return.
Wow.
Because the laser jet business is already going.
Mm.
Where would you put your 40 million?
Not putting that for sure, without a doubt.
No, they put it there.
They put it in the laser jet.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Because the laser jet, if you put 40 million into laser jet, you will get additional 20 billion from there.
And did that happen?
Yes.
Oh.
So the thinking process is ROI.
Yeah.
The ROI for this, and by the way, there's a whole list of 10 projects that I was involved in that didn't make it here. But the issue is the investment ROI was not fast enough compared with an existing ramp.
I see.
That's
That's a decision, though. I mean,
that's business,
yeah.
yes. So because the board said we needed to grow this fast, remember 35% is no kidding.
Yeah.
You cannot afford to now innovate because it's too expensive.
Yes.
So my summary for that is successful businesses are not interested in innovation or not interested in leading edge innovation. They're interested in innovating existing business. I give you the example. Nokia. It wasn't because they don't have enough investment. It was because they didn't invest in the thing that was going to kill them.
Yeah. But I think, sometimes, I think it was a perspective where, well, I think when it was Steve Jobs at one point, and he specifically said that he didn't believe in the touchscreen phone.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few years after, he creates
Mm-hmm.
a touchscreen phone
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think even, was it going in terms of the theme that you were mentioning, I think it was Kodak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kodak didn't believe in the digital camera, right?
Okay.
And then
Yep.
stuck to the way it was and died
Yep.
as a company.
In fact, that philosophy I just explained about HP is the same as Kodak. Because you look at Kodak, they could have gone into digital. In fact, they did. If they put X million into this digital camera, they may not get the return they want. Whereas if they put X million into their film side, they will get it.
Mm-hmm.
So the interest is to continue status quo.
Okay. So following short term rather than long term.
Yes.
That is
Because the board is the one leading you to it.
right. Because
So-
to keep the shareholders happy.
Correct, to keep the shareholders. That's why I think Steve Jobs was able to hold the shareholders back, because the shareholders respected his.
Yes, there is. In your advisory roles, what common challenges do board members or top executives face currently, of course, when trying to align technology initiatives with broader business objectives?
Okay. I think their objectives, their focus is actually how to make this thing grow and how to make sure it continues to grow. The challenge and the issue is, where are the surprises coming from? Okay. And how would you defend yourself from these surprises? Board members usually don't have that visibility. Because it's really the responsibility of the line management to know where that's coming from. And they have to explain to the board why this is important. And if that conversation did not work, the board will override everything else. Unless you have a board members who already know, they already have a view, and then they, within the board itself, start articulating. Because the difference between the board and management is the board sets direction, management execute. So if the board doesn't know what the new direction should be, management have to bring it in.
Sure.
And very often it's about how management explains and that whole issue, how they educate the board, because the board's job, they only show up, at board meetings.
Yeah. Once every quarter.
Yeah. And so at the times they are doing something else. So that, I think, is a new thing that has to happen.
Now, one thing, I'd love to go more into the career side and, understand, because you spoke a lot about HP, but we haven't spoken about Seagate and Solterra.
Okay.
What were those experiences? HP, you were a conglomerate per se in their time.
Yes.
And then Seagate, mid-size, one would say, in comparison to HP. Maybe actually the time when you joined them, they were big-time Seagate at that time. And then Solterra, a small foundry based out of Malaysia. Tell us more about those experiences there. What was the difference? Was there a difference in culture?
Definitely.
What were those differences?
Well, Seagate culture is really a mix of a lot of different companies. So they really were very silo-driven. But they had a very clear product line. So when I joined, I was actually headhunted to join. I've already been 20 years in HP, and I was getting antsy doing look for different things. And so Seagate headhunted me and said, we are going to go private. We need your skills to help us go into new business areas. And so that's really where I went in. There you can see Seagate as one whole company, and you had a top-down, very clear direction. So that's where the board comes in. The board said we needed a new set of business plans, and that was my job to come in. Within 3 months after looking through it, I said, if I give you the business plan, you can't even do it. Why? Because you don't have a synergistic approach as a whole company. Okay, so they needed. We had to really replumb everything from the IT infrastructure. So I had to take a kind of a step back and work with the IT team, the CIO, to help them transform the company. Every single thing, from marketing, from HR, from purchasing, from every single function had to. At that time, the IT team had 1,600 projects. Improvement projects. And that couldn't happen. It would never work. So I had to create a process to help them manage that through. Only after we did that, then I went back into the portfolio side and define what are the different product lines we have to do, what to create. So that's when we started looking at how do we grow. And that's also where the proposal was, we have to buy one of those competitors. At that time, there were 3 big ones, Seagate, Maxtor, and WD. You're number one. If you want to buy, who would you buy? One or two. So there was a whole strategy behind that. How do we think about it? Also, the thing that's coming in was solid state.
Yeah.
What do we do with that? Do we make a bet, or do we go whole hog, or do we ignore? So we ended up concluding we will just place a bet. So we had a part share, bought some equity in a solid state company. So Seagate it really is a worldwide company with places in Malaysia, in Singapore, all kinds of places. So how to transform all that is a big deal. Solterra is very different. Solterra is a national asset for Malaysia. I was very, very, very proud, very happy to be asked to go in.
So you, in Seagate, where were you based when you were at Seagate? Were you still in the US?
Yes, I was in Scotts Valley.
In Scotts Valley, okay. And then, of course, this is the key question I'd love to understand is what made you go back to Malaysia?
Okay.
Yeah. You've spent so long in the US, and now you've gone back to Malaysia and worked with Solterra.
Yep. At that time, it was 2000, 2001, 2002 was when the .com
crisis
crashed. I was in Seagate when that happened, so I was insulated from that. But when Seagate relisted 3 years later, they went back onto NASDAQ. I basically cashed out. And then I opened my own startup, my own consulting to see because I wanted to stay there, and looked at how, but the Silicon Valley couldn't recover at that time. At the same time, the East, Singapore, the East, they were booming like crazy. That's also when I was asked to go to China to run this company. So there was, because of my exposure, Seagate, I actually helped Seagate open a channel in China. The people who knew me in China asked me to go. So I went to China for about 2.5 years, worked to revamp a startup company. And that's where I saw that's really where the happening is. So I decided to come back to Singapore. And I was asked, once again, I was invited to do a startup. There was a startup already there, and the founders there, the shareholders, hey, E.T., why don't you come and help do this one? It's because I'm hardware. So they very rarely see hardware people. So I was doing the startup there. And I helped build the ecosystem for startups in Singapore. I was the advisor for NUS ecosystem. I also created my own consulting there, and that's where I consulted with different companies. And one of the companies was in Malaysia, a business school. And I was there for 6 months. And after I presented to them, they said, "Would you like to be our COO?"
At the business school?
Yes. Because you're overseas, we'll get Talent Corp, which is the Malaysian agencies to bring talent back in. So they arranged to have Talent Corp bring me back into Malaysia. That's how I ended up in Malaysia. So at the business school, my job was to revamp it from a government run into a profitable enterprise because it's spun off into a private school. So it was the first AACSB recognized business school in Malaysia.
Wow.
It was recognized.
When you took over?
They were there already before.
Okay.
But they wanted somebody
to elevate it.
Experience to help them take it. So my job was to now take that. One of the roles of the business school was to actually help government-linked companies to bring them up. So that school was identified by the then Prime Minister, then is Badawi, to help Malaysian businesses. He wanted to identify 2 business schools, just like the UK did. The UK, in the 1960s, they identified 2 business schools to help revamp the British industry. And that's turned out to be London Business School and Manchester Business School. So we had one in Malaysia. He did the same thing, Putra Business School, and another business school. So my job was to go look and transform different companies. So I got involved with ministries. I got involved with companies like Solterra and UEM, the university, different universities, different companies. So that's how I help those organizations transform, improve their business processes, improve whatever they want to improve. So that was my job. And that's how I ended up in Solterra. Solterra board then said, can you come and help us see what we can do what are the really interesting technologies we have? Can you come and have a look? So I go, you can't use your own people? They go, well, it's good to have an independent. So I went in 6 months. I looked at it and I found some amazing things in there. Number one, silicon photonics. Number two, DNA sequencing chips they were doing. Nobody else was doing that kind of stuff. Number three, MEMS. Okay. And number four, PMAT, ultrasonic sensors.
Yeah.
Okay. So I presented to the board and they went, whoa, we didn't know that. They looked at the management team. Do you guys have this? And they went, yeah. Then basically the chairman said, time out. We stopped this discussion. We set up a whole day event to discuss this separately because it's such a shock to them. Wow. So subsequently, they asked me, can you just come in? And we give you the VP position for strategy and you revamp the whole thing. So that's how I got into Solterra and took some of the technologies, and you can see them now. I've actually brought them out into the open. They were in the news, and as a result, a lot of companies then recognize what is it that Solterra did. And so, unfortunately, I didn't know at the time. It was on the block to be sold. So what I did was give them a better price.
For sure. Wow. Remarkable. And then, I want to go back to in terms of the topic when you were speaking, I think this is a very known topic because one thing that I'm aware of is your efforts in STEM and your efforts in the talent workforce here in Malaysia. So what made you shift your focus? So after Solterra, it seems to be that it was your next key focus. Why?
Oh, okay. Well, it's not so much my focus. It's just my natural way of doing things.
Okay.
I kind of see two groups of people. The groups of people who are the paying group, they need help. And they need help. I had the experience. I have a way of thinking that can help you. And you engage with me, we discuss. And that's really what I continue to do. I've never stopped. Okay. So the government agencies are continuing to do that with me, working with me on this. They're asking me, how can we do this and that? But I think the most important group of people is being ignored. That's the next generation. Ignored.
Is being ignored, okay.
The next generation. Because I look back at myself, how I got excited about electronics was because I was interested in something. I was curious in something.
Yeah.
And that was electronic organ. I wanted to do things and build it. And that's where my path started. I think today's education system is not encouraging that. And we need to have a way of triggering that set of curiosities. So I now work with different groups of people who are already doing that and see how I can help them. And so that, I think, is like CSR, if you like. And I've seen there's a lot of effort doing that. However, we don't have a more concerted effort from a higher level. And that's why I'm passionate about that. The passion really is to see other people besides myself getting into places that they never thought they would.
So, this goes back to that concept, which but you refer to as the human governance philosophy that I believe that you abide to. Could you elaborate a bit more about that?
Oh, okay. All right. So one of the big things I learned from Putra Business School is how each one of us inherently have the power to create change and the power to look at things in the right way. So the philosophy that was being pushed or being created by the CEO of Putra Business School at the time is the late Professor Alpha. She coined the words human governance. And initially I was not clear. Well, what's the difference between human governance and corporate governance? Okay, so we all know what corporate governance is how a board would work. It's a collection of people. Human governance is what drives the individual in the board.
Okay.
What makes them feel what is right and what is wrong and what's missing instead of just KPIs. See, what we talked about just now in the different examples, the companies were all focused on KPIs. Can you continue to grow at 45? Can you continue to grow at... And today we see all that. The key question then is, if I have the duty and responsibility to enable this business to grow, what are the conditions that's needed? One is the people in there need to have empowerment. How would you encourage that instead of just throwing more KPIs in there? Because I've seen companies, if they are empowered, they move mountains. Yeah. So it's how do you do that? So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is it doesn't apply only to work environments. It applies to our everyday and our interactions with everyone, your family, your friends, your relatives. How do you interact with them in a way that says you as a human being has integrity, is polite, has ambitions, all those. And how do you balance those? That's why the word governance is there. It's not just, whoa, let's go there, here or there. It's governance. It's how do you now nurture that aspect of it. So that's how I see that. And so one aspect of that I'm practicing now is how do you now help other people, help other younger people. That's one aspect. The other aspect is everyone you meet all have certain requirements, certain ambitions. If there's a way of working together, why not? Yeah. So it's that kind of a thinking process that I would kind of learn from this business school. And my practice that I went in with the consulting is actually with that in the background. So that's how I worked with Solterra. I work with different organizations. With that learning, now how do we present it in there? How do we then enable people to see what they need to see? What they do with that after that, I don't know. It's up to them now. But my role has been exercised.
So on that perspective, then, if we look at two ways in this governance perspective, first one is, what would the ET Tan now say to the ET Tan that's just leaving to Scotland from Malaysia?
Whoa. I'm a great believer in timelines.
Timelines, okay.
I believe
in terms of timelines in manifestation mode, or
timeline that if you go back in time and make any change, I might be the one who's going to be different.
Different today, sure.
Yeah.
The butterfly effect.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I kind of look back at that, I would say carry on.
Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, because that's how I ended up being. I'm not saying I'm not the right person, because I think we should look at ourselves as the sum total of everything that's happened. That is good.
Okay, then if we flip the script, then what would the ET Tan now say to a graduate from an electrical engineering degree here in Malaysia who is about to go to a semiconductor company abroad?
Okay, good. That's different. I would say two things to them. Number one, there's a question that I will have implying. Are you sure that's what you want to do? That's the implied question. But really, what my advice would be to him or her, is follow your passion. Meaning, this should be your passion. If it's not your passion, as soon as you find out, do something about it. Either reinforce, find a way, or switch. Because everything we do needs to be driven by passion, and the only way passion can work is if you're curious to learn. If you're not curious, this young person is going to another country to learn. Then learn. Then go in there, learn about the country, learn about the projects, learn about your subjects, learn about the people there. That was what I did because I didn't have an alternative view.
But do you think that, it's not right for me to just say Malaysia, but, the Southeast Asia community of young engineers that are just graduating, I think now they have more opportunities to actually do what they can in the region in comparison to the time you had. But would you say to them, do something here first and then go abroad? Or would you advise them to go abroad first and then come back here after?
Okay. So the word I will focus on is the word do. Okay. Each individual will have a different definition of do. To some people, they would want to learn how to improve this technique. Another would be, I want to explore these other things. I'm just using this thing as a platform. So they need to know that, because you can find opportunities everywhere. For example, I come back to Penang and I find Penang has some of the most exciting technologies you can find. Some you can't even find in Silicon Valley. Okay? Because you have so many different companies here. You have medtech, you have semicon, you have all kinds of tech, agri-tech, okay? It's about what you want and how you get to it. Okay? I was probably lucky because I didn't think what I want. I just got whatever I took. I took whatever I ended up with. Okay? But if you did, then look for it. And I hear one of the biggest complaints is, I don't know where to find it. And this is where I think we had a conversation about it. This is where I think a helping hand is needed to highlight some of the cool technologies that we already have here, some of the cool things we do. In Silicon Valley, you throw a stone into any cafe, you hit someone who will tell you what they're doing. Here it's really hard. I've been here in Penang for the last 3 years, and I really have to dig to find out where those gems are. So the bit that's missing for these young people is just because they don't know what's here. You know the story of digging diamonds in the ground. You start looking for it over there, but actually it could be under your feet. Yeah. So I think some things can be done to highlight, to help. I've been talking to many of these companies here. They would like to have a way of sharing, but they don't know how.
Sharing as in how? In terms of contributing?
Well, sharing in just telling the world, this is what we're doing. We're doing some really cool stuff here. Okay?
but the world doesn't know about it.
Yes, or even the locality doesn't know anything about it. How do we tell that? Because they don't know whether what they're telling is confidential or not. So they themselves don't know the degree of their contribution. So that's why I see one of the issues. So we can help doing that. So that's what I've been doing on my LinkedIn, sharing with those people. This is what I find. Of course, I have to ask them permission that I can share.
No, it's really remarkable that you say this because, even us, we only recently just entered this region, right? There's an equipment manufacturing company here who is known for incredible technology, but they just had a fear of going global.
Mm-hmm.
And they worked with us and secured a very large business through one of our summits. So it really baffles me to understand. I'm actually interviewing the CEO soon. So it's actually, it was one of the questions I would love to ask, and maybe you might know the answer to it, is why are local equipment manufacturers, or just say semiconductor people in the ecosystem here in Penang, why they're fearful of being more open or being more global, because it's going to help their company grow.
Yeah. So I've been.
Do they not? Do they not think they're good enough? You see? Or
actually no. So I think when you meet them, and I do, they do want to have that because we have to talk at the CEO level, right? Or they want to, but they need to have a way of doing that because they need to delegate it down. Okay, how they do that is the issue. They don't know how. Okay, because they do know that if they do it well, you get more customers.
Right.
Okay. They also have the other side of it. If I do too much, then I'll create competitors. And that, I think, is probably a concern that is really not a big concern, because if your market is big, that's not an issue. So it's about how you defend yourself, how you put the rest of your organization to know how to respond. So they, as the head of the organization, they don't know how to activate their organization to be a group. Okay, so that's where I see they need the help.
So in terms of horizon, looking ahead for the next 5 to 10 years, I think the best question, because now your focus is Penang, for example, in this region, and you seem very passionate about this region. What do you see, or where do you see Penang?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And its semiconductor ecosystem, as one would say.
I actually see great things happening. In fact, the activities that's going on right now is under the water. There's a lot of activities going on. Okay. And one of the reasons why some of them are not feeling they are needed to market anything else. I'm already busy. I'm so busy. Okay, that's one aspect of it. As Penang is being recognized more and more in the last 6-9 months, there's a lot more attention because of the announcement for NSS, because of the recognition by WEF that Penang is the big area. It's not that it hasn't been, it has. It's just that suddenly the spotlight shone. Okay, I think everybody's beginning to start moving. So the way I look at it is that we in Penang need to now figure out how to engage other areas, because there will be limited. I'll give you an example. The simplest statistic is, in the next 5 years, Southeast Asia is going to be the 4th largest growth area in the world.
Wow.
This is statistics by the World Bank. Okay, 4th largest. And it's going to be, majority is going to be young people. They're going to be young, digitally savvy, and they're going to be consuming like crazy. Okay, it's about 65% of them are going to be middle class. And that alone is already bigger than the population of the US. So now if you add that together with India and China, this is a huge area.
Right.
So Penang cannot focus on only Penang. It has to find a way to leverage their skills to others. For example, Johor and Singapore is going to create this SEZ, this huge industrial zone that is 2 times bigger than Shenzhen.
Wow.
Okay. And that agreement with Singapore has just been signed a couple of weeks ago. So there's going to be a huge amount of stuff going in, and they have more land than Penang. So the only way Penang can continue is to say our depth in supply chain is deeper than anyone else. We've got 50 years head start. And so what they have to start doing is now go up the value chain. And then if you want to expand, take your low value stuff, move it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Don't keep everything in. So I see that as a big area for them. You can help Johor grow, help Indonesia grow, help everybody else grow. The base is Penang. If you don't do that, they will catch up.
Very fast. For those out there eager to, come into the semiconductor industry, what guiding principles or lessons would you emphasize?
One of the things that I want to help people get a clearer view is what is semiconductor industry. Most of the time when we talk about semiconductor industry, where people are thinking wafers. We're thinking front end. In Malaysia, there's only 5 fabs that can do front end. And they're not in Penang. Okay?
Yeah.
So why is Penang the semiconductor hub? Is because we are providing everything else to them. Like test equipment, like the production equipment, like every piece of equipment that would go into the front end or the back end, we're doing this. The supply chain is second to none. And supply chain is all about how tier 2, tier 3 work with each other to help tier 1. That part, they're all here. So you still need to understand the semiconductor technology, but now you're providing tools to enable that. So that's one part. The second part is people also look at semiconductor is IC design. IC design also has IC tests, post-silicon testing, and all kinds of things. Okay? So semiconductors isn't one homogeneous group. It's actually a very complicated supply chain. So I think it's available. Every skill is needed actually to actually get involved in semiconductors. And that's one of the things I found when I went and did the investigation in Solterra. DNA testing? What? How does a chip do DNA? Right? Now you're going to have microfluidics. That means medical.
Yep.
Right? If you don't know medical, if you don't know reagents, you don't know those molecular biology, you can't participate.
Yeah.
Optics. Right? So all those now are semicon.
I think it's a very important question to ask you is what does Penang mean to you?
One word. Home.
Oh.
I've been out of the country for almost 35 years.
34.
Yeah. I was born here in Penang. I was here for about 12 years before my family moved to KL. And then from there, I left to do my studies and essentially tried to come back, but couldn't. Yeah, so this is for me home, and be able to see that it's doing things that I have been experiencing, I've been trained to do. So technology is here, the people that are here, and be able to meet all kinds of people like yourselves.
Yeah, sure.
And that's actually the big deal.
If there's one thing you'd want to see Penang change, or one thing that you think that could be improved in Penang, what would it be?
There's a lot of things that are
Number one
craving
priority.
change.
It'd be one thing. Or I'll make it easier for you. If you can note down the things, then you look at one of them, and if you had like a magic wand, and you just chose one of them and it became true, which one would it be?
Make it even more livable.
More livable.
I've used the term the pearlness of Penang. What constitutes the pearlness of Penang? I've given a talk about that actually, because Penang used to be called, or is, the Pearl of the Orient. And if it's the Pearl of the Orient, we need to keep the pearl polished, luster. We must make sure we don't lose that. And today, that luster is because of the livable place. We now have technology. We have actually a very good environment. And how you live, just make sure that doesn't get lost. Because that's the reason why companies come. Companies come when they decide is because the decision maker likes his family to be here.
That's a good point. Yeah. Is there a final message that you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something of I don't know, something about the interplay of semiconductors, leadership, or meaningful human impact that you want to put out there?
Sure. We are all humans. So the message I really want us to think through is humans are the one making the difference. And each one of us is the one making the difference. However much that we all talk about AI coming and this and that, okay, still it needs the human to make the decisions. And so coming back to what I talked about just now on human governance, we need to look at those and see our role, because everyone has a different role. And our role, if we look at the technology side, that's actually a very large responsibility. Technology, I always believe, is a tool to help business to achieve something, to help people. So on both ends of it, here's a human. The end result is benefit to human, not a machine. So it's our role, responsibility to look at that. And the more we are able to focus on that, the more we'll be enlightened, passionate, and do the right thing.
Lastly, for those, of course, who want to engage with your ideas and follow your work, or even as we have done, because it's remarkable to have you with us, to potentially collaborate with you. What's the best way they could reach out to you, E.T.?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So far, I've already got 7,000 people connected with me. And it looks like every week I have 100 people or so adding themselves to it. LinkedIn will be the best place to connect.
Sure. I'm sure you don't get invites like I'll keep getting people trying to sell me wafer grinding machines. Last but not least, we have a tradition on the show where the last interviewee that we have leaves a question for the next one. So the last question that was left for you, E.T., is what book would you like yourself as the high school child to learn and deeply integrate? So basically, what book would you recommend that the high school version of you should have read, learn, and deeply integrate?
High school version of me.
Yeah. What book would you recommend that version of E.T. turn?
Wow. Okay. I would probably say it's a kind of a physics book.
Which one?
Asimov.
Asimov.
Isaac Asimov.
Asimov.
Isaac Asimov was my favorite author when I was young. And he had different kinds of genres. He had non-fiction and fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The non-fiction will tell you all the physics stuff, and he even writes about biology and all that stuff. Those are great because he writes it in a very clear way. But the one that my favorite actually is an anthology. I forget the title of it, but in there it tells short stories, and every short story there's always a twist. Okay, and that twist gets you to think, oh man, I didn't expect this until the last paragraph. Okay. I find that very fascinating because it gets you to be thinking that there are things that you may not assume. Because if you assume too much, you fall into the trap. And he has a series that actually is fantastic. That tells you, about those. And actually, one of the books I think you probably know about is the one that's called iRobot, about the laws of robotics, and he puts those laws of robotics in place. So I kind of say that's my favorite author, and that is one of the books that I would
recommend your high child.
Because when you read that, a few things come to mind. You start thinking of your learning of physics and all kinds of things. And then here's what you haven't thought about. Boom.
Marvelous. E.T. Tan, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. Intriguing discussions, and I would definitely love to do a part 2 to discuss the progress of Penang in the next, let's say the next year or so, to see how things have gone. But thank you for your insights. I know you've impacted many people's lives out there in the semiconductor industry, and of course, you are regarded as an inspiration to many. So thank you for all the work that you do, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed talking to you and also bringing back memories of things that I used to do.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, E.T.
Thank you.